On that, plus updates on the National Guard members killed in Syria and a special presidential address to the nation.
President Trump announced the move yesterday on Truth Social, writing that Venezuela is now surrounded by what he called the largest armada ever assembled in the history of South America. Trump said the pressure will increase until what he described as stolen U.S. oil, land, and assets are returned. Trump has designated Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro's regime a foreign terrorist organization, accusing it of using stolen oil revenues to fund drug trafficking, human trafficking, murder, and kidnapping. Maduro denounced the American advances yesterday, saying imperialism and the fascist right want to colonize Venezuela to take over its wealth of oil, gas, gold, among other minerals. Congressman Joaquin Castro called Trump's blockade an act of war. He said the House will vote tomorrow on a resolution pushing for an end to hostilities with Venezuela. The Maduro regime previously described the United States' recent seizing of a tanker filled with Venezuelan crude oil as international piracy. The White House said last week the U.S. was justified in taking the vessel.
We're not going to stand by and watch sanctioned vessels sail the seas with black market oil, the proceeds of which will fuel narco-terrorism of rogue and illegitimate regimes around the world.
Tensions are also extending to the skies. The FAA has issued an advisory warning airlines of deteriorating security conditions in Venezuelan airspace, citing heightened military activity. The warning runs through February 19th, 2026. And Secretary of War Pete Hegseth said yesterday that the Pentagon will release to select lawmakers the full video of a September strike on a drug trafficking boat that killed survivors of an initial strike. Democrats have criticized the military strikes, especially the second one on September 2nd. They say it targeted shipwrecked survivors who otherwise would not have been able to conduct further operations. President Trump will also address the nation from the White House today.
He's going to talk a lot about the accomplishments over the past 11 months, all that he's done to bring our country back to greatness, and all he continues to plan to do to continue delivering for the American people over the next 3 years.
The president's remarks are scheduled for 9 p.m. Eastern and will be broadcast live on the White House's social media channels. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
President Trump designated Nicolas Maduro's regime as a foreign terrorist organization and ordered a blockade of oil tankers entering or leaving Venezuela. Joining us to discuss is Armen Kurdian, retired U.S. Navy captain and foreign policy and national security analyst. So Armen, good afternoon. Can I just ask you what kind of impact this will have on Venezuela's oil reserves, and what's the overall effect going to be on the country?
Good afternoon, Don. Are you talking about the blockade here?
The blockade, that's correct.
Okay, so there's quite a few bit to unpack here. The terminology of blockade is essentially used to when you stop all ships going into and out of a country, whether it's dry cargo, wet cargo, oil, fishing trawlers, everything. So that's not a terminology I would use, because the term blockade actually under international law is generally recognized as an act of war. This is not that. This is essentially a call that says any sanctioned vessel traveling into and out of Venezuela will be intercepted, perhaps boarded and seized. So it's a bit of a distinction right there, and I think how this was communicated was not helpful. Now the question is going to be whether Venezuela is going to start escorting some of these ships outside of its waters. Their Navy is not much to speak of, so they wouldn't be able to do it on a regular basis. If they did, then the amount of oil they'd be able to transport outside of the country or back into the country, or other kind of products, would be severely limited. A lot of these ships that are carrying this sanctioned oil are already sanctioned under international law. They're hard to insure. They're stateless in a lot of ways, and a lot of times they're not in the best conditions. So taking them off of the high seas is not necessarily a bad thing.
All right, understood. Can we also talk about labeling the regime as a terrorist organization? Does that provide any new tools for the administration?
You can label them as a terrorist organization, and yes, it does provide additional tools for the U.S. to handle that in terms of, like, perhaps a precursor to military strikes or other kinds of targeted attacks. I don't know whether necessarily labeling his government as a foreign terrorist terrorist organization. It would really stand to scrutiny, and I think it's a little bit of an overreach. I think a lot of the interception, the work that's being done, taking out the little drug boats, and the seizing of these tankers, and additional sanctions on the country is probably necessary. Trump has talked about, this country stole a lot of American oil and our assets. He's going back and referring to, back in the 70s and also 2007, when the regimes basically nationalized a lot of U.S. assets, U.S. oil refineries in the country. The claims are anywhere from $10 billion to $60 billion of U.S. assets that were that basically seized or nationalized by various regimes within Venezuela. The previous one being Hugo Chavez. So there is validity to that claim that Venezuela has taken some of our assets, and it might be a little bit stretch to say that it's a terror organization, but we certainly know that they are receiving under the table drug money, allowing a lot of these drugs flowing through Colombia to pass through their country into the United States and into Europe and the rest of the world.
Okay, on this subject, China is actually showing its support for Venezuela. It's saying that China and Venezuela are strategic partners. This is according to a Chinese Foreign Ministry statement. And just pointing it out that it's reported China is Venezuela's biggest oil buyer. So what is China's ultimate interest in this situation through this support?
Well, just like the Soviet Union tried back in the 1980s in Nicaragua and other parts of South America, China is trying to keep a foothold in the Western Hemisphere. And the fact that Venezuela and the U.S. are not getting along means that the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and that's what China is trying to do right now. China needs oil, so they're going to be buying sanctioned oil at a discount. The question is whether the president will intercept any vessels carrying sanctioned oil from Venezuela to China. That remains to be seen. Certainly, China has been financing Iran's war with support of the Houthi rebels and other proxies in the Middle East through buying the sanctioned Iranian oil. So you see a lot of these countries that are just on the other side of the line, the ones that we talk about normally: Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran, and you can maybe now add Venezuela to that mix, simply aligned because they don't have any ideological similarities, but they're all aligned because they don't like the United States.
You know what I find sort of hypocritical or ironic? According to that statement from China's foreign ministry, it also said that China opposes unilateral bullying. But under the country, the country under the CCP has a record of doing exactly that. Just think South China Sea or its actions towards Taiwan. So what do you think about that? Your comments there?
Oh, absolutely. Look what they've done with the Spratly Islands going in with a lot of other countries who have claims to that territory. They've definitely tried to say the South China Sea belongs to them, which it does not. The U.S. only recognizes that 12 nautical mile limit. And to the U.S.'s perhaps discredit, I don't think we've necessarily stood as strongly with a lot of those countries in China's immediate regional sphere of influence as strongly as we should have. Now, obviously, those countries are over there. They got to live with China in their backyard, so they don't want to tick the Chinese off that much. But the fact that the U.S. hasn't stood up for them, that the U.S., the Obama administration, basically allowed China to militarize the Spratly Islands, which have a lot of natural resources, build artificial reefs and artificial runways and military bases in that area. He goes to say, well, is the U.S. going to be a reliable partner or a reliable ally in that part of the world? So in a lot of ways, we kind of have ourselves to blame for giving China a little bit more of a free hand or being less vocal, or less, not vocal, but less active in terms of our criticism and taking those actions to try to counter some of that, counterbalance some of their actions there.
Okay, Armin, there's another thing on my mind. I wanted to get your thoughts as well on the National Guard soldiers killed in Syria. President Trump said he's going to meet the plane carrying the bodies. The U.S. Central Command said this was a lone ISIS terrorist. How should we interpret that? I mean, what is ISIS's current operational capabilities in Syria?
So ISIS is starting to recoup itself a little bit. They're nowhere near where they were, but there's still territory, parts of Syria and parts of Iraq where they are in control. and the government does not have control. I wouldn't necessarily call the new Syrian government as a strong U.S. ally, but they're certainly a lot less antipathetic towards the United States than the Assad regime. So they want to bring Syria back into the fold of the international community. I believe that Trump could have a massive foreign policy success if he's able to repeat with Syria, the Camp David Accord with Egypt in '78, and then the peace treaty that Israel had with Jordan in 1994. Because Syria is the one country right there on the border of Israel where they don't have a signed peace treaty following the wars in 1967 and 1973. Now, in terms of ISIS, I'm sure the Syrian government wants us there to help them, combat ISIS, keep intelligence on them, keep identifying what they're actually doing. On the other side of that coin, those troops, there's only 1,000 there. They're not really an offensive force. There's not much that they can do. So if there is any counter attacks, it would have to be from airstrikes or perhaps drone strikes as well, kinds of things. This what did sound like a lone wolf attack, an insider attack, which is very hard to defend from. And we saw a lot of those happen in Iraq. A 2-star Air Force general was killed in an insider attack as well. So I think that there does need to be a little bit of a closer scrutiny to determine whether those troops in that part of the world are serving a valid function, if they are providing requisite intelligence and supporting the Syrian regime and countering ISIS at the same time. But if that's true, then we need the European allies and other countries involved there as well.
Well, all right, Armin, that's all I had in mind today. Really great to talk to you, as always. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Don. Have a great day.
Nick Reiner, the son of filmmaker Rob Reiner, makes his first court appearance in Los Angeles in connection with his parents' deaths. His arraignment has been delayed for